The photograph was catalogued as ordinary. 2 girls. A dirt yard. A hand held tightly. Nothing about it suggested danger. And that was the problem, because the most dangerous photographs from the 19th century were never the ones that looked strange at first glance. They were the ones that looked right, proper, calm, acceptable enough to be forgotten in a box, passed over by decades, waiting for someone to believe they were safe to touch. This one was taken in 1895, and it should never have been restored. The image surfaced during the digitization of a rural Midwestern collection. Farm families, town gatherings, school groups, funerary portraits. Thousands of glass plates and cabinet cards, most of them damaged, warped, or too faded to salvage. This photograph survived better than most. 2 girls stood side by side, facing the camera. The older one, no more than 10, stood straight, chin lifted, eyes calm. The younger girl stood closer, her hand held tightly in her sister's grasp. Their dresses were plain, their shoes worn, their expressions neutral, the way children were taught to look during long exposure. Behind them, nothing remarkable. A wooden fence, bare trees, a pale sky. On the back of the photograph, written in careful script, for remembrance, no names. Early photography demanded stillness. Children struggled with it. Hands slipped. Faces blurred. But in this image, both girls were perfectly clear. Almost too clear. The restoration began as routine work, removing scratches, balancing contrast, correcting exposure loss from age. The technician had done this hundreds of times before. Nothing prepared him for what appeared when the background noise was stripped away. Between the girls' clasped hands, something emerged. Not a shadow, not damage. A shape. At first, it looked like a smear, darkness bleeding where their fingers met. But as clarity increased, the shape gained definition. Texture. Depth. It was not between their hands, it was inside them. The older girl's fingers were not wrapped around her sister's hand. They were wrapped around something else, something narrower, longer, something that extended downward beyond where the younger girl's wrist should have been. The technician stopped the process, saved the file, stared, then zoomed in. The younger girl's sleeve ended too early. Her arm did not. It thinned, stretched, and where a child's wrist should have been was a dark continuation, unnaturally smooth, tapering as it disappeared into the shadow below the frame, like it was not meant to be seen all at once. The technician noticed something else. The younger girl's face. She was smiling, not broadly, not happily. Her lips curved upward just enough to suggest relief, while her eyes were not focused on the camera. They were turned toward her sister's hand, as if watching it carefully. Restoration logs show the technician paused the process for nearly an hour. No activity, no keystrokes, just the file open on his screen. The photograph came from a region known for isolated homesteads and harsh winters. Church records were sparse. Census data incomplete. But one ledger survived, a burial register from 1894 to 1897. It listed the name Eliza Harrow, age 6. Cause of death, winter illness. Burial date, February 1895. The photograph was dated March. There was no record of a second burial. The restoration resumed. More detail emerged. The younger girl's shoes were missing. Her feet did not touch the ground. The older girl's grip told a different story now. Her fingers were tight. Too tight. Knuckles white, foretips pressing inward, as if holding something that resisted slipping away. This was not a portrait of affection. It was containment. Further enhancement revealed a faint distortion around the younger girl's outline. The background bent subtly inward toward her shape, like fabric pulled tight around a form beneath it. The air around her did not behave like the rest of the image. The technician reported nausea, then cold, then an overwhelming sensation that something was waiting for him to finish. The photograph had not been preserved to remember a moment. It had been preserved to hold something in place, and the restoration, by clarifying what time had blurred, was undoing that work. The final enhancement before the technician stopped showed something no one expected. The younger girl's other hand. It was not empty. It reached behind her sister's arm, fingers extended, touching nothing visible, except the space where a shadow pooled unnaturally deep. She was not being held. She was holding on. The technician did not report the image immediately. That was later considered the second mistake. The first, of course, was restoring it at all. After the initial enhancement, the file was saved under a temporary name and closed. The technician stepped away from his workstation, convinced that distance would settle his nerves. He washed his hands longer than necessary. The water felt too cold. The room too quiet. When he returned, the monitor had not gone to sleep. The photograph was open again, zoomed in further than he remembered leaving it, centered precisely on the place where the girl's hands met. He checked the activity log. No input recorded. What had looked like a dark extension before now showed structure. The thing the older girl was holding had joints, not fingers, segments, subtle bends where bone should not bend, and where skin should crease, there was smoothness, unbroken, uninterrupted, like something that had never been meant to be exposed to air. The younger girl's arm was not fading. It was continuing, downward, past where the photograph should have ended, past the frame, as if the image could not contain all of her. The technician noticed the grain pattern changing around the younger girl's body. Old photographs degrade unevenly. But here, the grain aligned itself, tightening around her shape, compressing detail as though the emulsion itself were pulling inward. The image was stabilizing something. A new detail emerged near the girl's feet. A shadow, but not one cast by sunlight. It fell straight down, dark and narrow, ending abruptly just below the hem of the older girl's dress. The younger girl had no shadow at all. The technician documented his observations and finally escalated the image to the archival review board. They advised him to stop work until further assessment. He agreed, but the image did not. That night, he dreamed of hands, small ones, cold ones, reaching upward from darkness, grasping at wrists, sleeves, hems, anything that moved. He woke with the sensation of fingers still wrapped around his own. There were faint marks on his forearm, indentations, too evenly spaced. The review board convened 3 days later. By then, the technician had not slept properly. He presented the original scan alongside the restored version, explaining the anomalies calmly, professionally. No one laughed, because everyone in the room saw the same thing. One of the board members, a specialist in post-mortem photography, recognized the pose immediately. Children holding hands was common, but this grip was wrong. The older girl's arm angle suggested resistance, not support. Her shoulder was tense, her posture rigid, as if she were bracing herself. The younger girl's expression unsettled them most. Her smile was not playful. It was restrained, contained, like someone concentrating very hard on staying present. The board authorized further research, church records, medical logs, family histories. They found the Harrow family easily, too easily. The Harrow homestead had been abandoned in late 1895. Neighbors described the parents leaving abruptly, refusing help, refusing questions. The mother was said to have wrapped her hands constantly in cloth. The father avoided eye contact. They took only what they could carry. They did not take photographs. A midwife's journal from the area mentioned a, quote, second passing that winter. Not a death, a passing. The entry described a child who would not finish leaving, and a sister who stood where she was told and did not let go. The photograph was taken weeks later. The restoration continued under supervision. As clarity increased, the background behind the girls revealed something new. The fence line warped inward. The boards bowed slightly toward the younger girl. Even the ground beneath her feet darkened unnaturally, like soil pressed thin over an empty space. Someone suggested stopping. Another suggested sealing the image. A third pointed out that if something was present, understanding it mattered. That was the third mistake. A high-resolution pass revealed faint markings on the younger girl's arm. Lines, circular impressions, like pressure points left by repeated gripping. But the size did not match a child's hand. They were too wide, too evenly spaced. The older girl's grip made sense now. She wasn't holding her sister. She was holding whatever her sister was attached to. The board member who specialized in burial practices grew pale. In the late 1800s, premature burial was a known fear. Families sometimes tied strings to coffins, bells to hands, anything to signal movement after burial. But in rural areas with frozen ground, delays were common. And sometimes the delay was intentional. The younger girl had been buried, but not completely. The photograph was not taken to remember them. It was taken to document that the sister was still doing her job. As the meeting adjourned, the lights in the archive flickered, just once. When they returned to normal, the photograph on the screen had changed. The older girl's head was now tilted slightly toward her sister. Her eyes were no longer focused on the camera. They were looking down, and the younger girl's smile was wider. Once the change was noticed, it could not be unnoticed. The tilt of the older girl's head was subtle, barely a few degrees, but it altered the entire meaning of her expression. What had once looked like composure now looked like strain. Her jaw was set, her lips pressed together, not in calm, but in effort, as if she were listening. The photograph was immediately removed from the main workstation and transferred to an isolated system. No network, no external storage, no automatic backups. The board agreed on one thing. Whatever was happening, it was responding to attention, but the image did not stop changing. The next enhancement revealed something that should not have existed in an 1895 photograph. Depth, not the illusion of depth, actual spatial layering as if parts of the image were closer to the viewer than others. The younger girl's arm appeared to extend forward, slightly out of plane with the rest of her body. Not moving, reaching. One of the analysts noticed a repeating artifact in the shadows beneath the girl's feet. A pattern that resembled overlapping handprints, pressed upward from below the ground. Not emerging, holding. Historical context began to matter. In the winter of 1895, the region experienced a severe freeze. Ground hardened weeks earlier than usual. Burials were delayed. In some cases, bodies were kept in root cellars, sheds, or barns until the earth softened. And sometimes children were buried shallow. A church elder's letter surfaced during the research. It mentioned the second child and warned that keeping her close would only invite more waiting. The phrase was underlined. Waiting. The younger girl's name was found at last. Eliza Harrow. The older girl was Margaret, age 11. Margaret's role became clearer with each frame. Her posture was not protective. It was instructional. She stood exactly as she had been told. Feet placed deliberately, arm held at a precise angle. Grip unbroken. The photograph was not capturing affection, it was recording compliance. When the image was inverted, an old technique used to expose hidden details, something appeared beneath the younger girl. A void, not darkness, absence. The ground texture stopped abruptly where her body should have cast weight. Soil, grass, and shadow simply ended, as if she were standing above something open. The younger girl's other hand, previously lost in shadow, became visible. Her fingers were curled upward, gripping something below the frame, something that did not belong to her. The board debated halting the project entirely, but the photograph had already begun its work. People who reviewed the image reported similar sensations: pressure in the arms, tingling in the fingers, the urge to clasp their hands together and hold. One analyst was found hours later in the archive hallway, standing with his arm extended downward, hand clenched around nothing. He said he was helping. The photograph updated again, this time without any enhancement. The younger girl's face had changed. Her smile was no longer restrained. It was grateful. Margaret's eyes were now fully turned toward her sister, and for the first time, fear was visible. The final discovery in this phase came from a detail no one had examined closely enough before. The girl's shadows. Margaret's shadow fell normally. Eliza's did not. It rose, narrow, elongated, stretching upward along the fence behind them, too tall, too thin, ending beyond the top of the frame. Not cast by the sun, cast by something beneath her. The photograph was not haunted. It was anchored. Eliza had not returned. She had been partially retrieved, and Margaret was the tether. The restoration was no longer revealing hidden damage. It was undoing a seal. The board ordered the process paused indefinitely, but the image was no longer confined to the screen. Those who had studied it too long began to notice small changes in their surroundings, floors that felt hollow underfoot, shadows that bent toward their hands, the sense that if they stood very still, something below might reach up. The photograph did not want to be restored. It wanted to be completed. The restoration did not just expose hidden details. It awakened something. The older girl, Margaret, was not just holding Eliza's hand. She was holding her tether, the fragile connection keeping the younger girl's essence anchored between life and death. Eliza was trapped, not in the photograph, not in the grave, but somewhere in between. Folklore from the region spoke of the waiting place, a liminal space where souls lingered before crossing over. It was said that children who died suddenly could become stuck there, unable to fully leave because of unfinished bonds. Margaret, in this story, had been tasked with keeping Eliza grounded, her posture, her grip, the tightness of her hold, all signs of a ritual binding them together. The photograph was a record, but more than that, it was a warning. The more the restoration progressed, the stronger the sensation grew. Archivists who worked with the photo reported cold spots, whispered voices, and the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching them. One technician swore he saw Eliza's hand twitch beneath the older girl's grip during a late-night review. Attempts to print the restored photograph resulted in strange physical effects. Prints curled upward at the edges, developing strange discolorations. Some developed faint wet spots that never dried. The Harrow family history revealed a chilling secret. Eliza had been buried alive. Contemporary accounts from neighboring families described a harsh winter, with frozen ground making burials nearly impossible. Local lore told of the mother's desperate refusal to release Eliza, wrapping her fingers tightly around the child's wrist in the cold darkness of the cellar. Margaret had promised to hold her sister's hand until the earth thawed. The photograph was taken to capture that moment, a last testament of love, fear, and horror frozen in time. The final act of restoration revealed the unimaginable. In the darkest corner of the photograph, beneath the girl's feet, a faint shape emerged. A tall, thin silhouette, impossibly narrow and stretching beyond the frame. It was the waiting shadow. The shadow was not cast by light. It was cast by absence, a presence. the thing that held Eliza back, the thing Margaret fought against with all her strength. Archivists began to distance themselves from the photograph. The technician who first restored it refused to look at it again. He left the project, moving to a different city. But some things cannot be left behind. Whispers spoke of others who had tried to restore forgotten photographs, of images that should have stayed blurred, of lives subtly altered by the act of uncovering. The story of the Harrow girls was not just a tragic family history. It was a reminder, a warning, that some things in the past should remain in shadow, that the boundaries between life and death are thinner than we imagine, and that some bonds, once broken, can never be undone. With each passing day after the photograph's restoration, subtle changes began to ripple through the small town that had once been home to the Harrow family. Locals reported strange occurrences, shadows that lingered longer than their owners, cold drafts in rooms with closed windows, and the faint sound of children whispering from empty fields. The photograph was displayed briefly at a local museum before the unrest it caused forced its removal. Visitors who viewed the image reported a sense of unease that lingered long after leaving. Some claimed to see the younger girl's hand twitch inside the frame, as if trying to break free. Researchers who studied the photo began to suffer strange symptoms: sleeplessness, nightmares, unexplainable bruises shaped like fingers on their arms, a creeping sensation that something was watching. The most disturbing case involved a young historian named David. David became obsessed with the Harrow photograph, spending hours analyzing every detail. He reported feeling as if someone was standing behind him, watching, waiting. One night, David disappeared. His apartment was found in disarray. On his desk, the photograph lay face down, edges curled and stained with drops of something dark. His computer showed only one open document, a single sentence typed repeatedly. "She is still holding on." Police found no evidence of foul play. David was simply gone. No note, no trace. Meanwhile, the shadow beneath the younger girl in the photograph seemed to grow darker with each passing day. Some claimed it now reached beyond the frame, creeping slowly along walls, floors, and ceilings in places where the photo was displayed. The Harrow girl's story became a local legend. Whispered warnings passed among townsfolk told others not to look too closely at old photographs, not to try to restore what had been meant to stay lost. For Margaret, the burden continued. She had promised to hold her sister's hand, to keep her tethered to this world. And now, she was not alone in her vigil. The photograph, once thought to be a simple family remembrance, had become a prison, a haunting reminder that some bonds stretch beyond death, and some hands will not be released. The final chapter of the Harrow sisters' story is not found in books or records. It lives in the silence between moments, the stillness where time folds back on itself and the past bleeds into the present. The last known photograph of Margaret Harrow was taken shortly after David's disappearance. She stood alone in the same dirt yard, hands clenched tightly in front of her. No smile, no children by her side. The restored image of Eliza, the younger sister, remained locked away, stored in a vault, guarded by those who feared what it might awaken if exposed again. Yet the story refuses to rest. Local legends tell of a figure, a young girl seen standing motionless by the old fence line, holding an invisible hand, watching the world pass by with eyes too old for her age. The shadow beneath the girls in the original photograph never vanished. It waits, patient, endless. Some say that the bond between the Harrow sisters is unbreakable. Others warn that some bonds should never be formed. If you ever come across a faded photograph from a forgotten time, look closely, but don't stare too long, because sometimes, behind the innocent faces, there is a hand holding on, and it might just be holding you. Thank you for joining Forgotten Remains, where the past is never truly gone, only forgotten.